There is a moment most people have experienced at least once. You're somewhere completely ordinary, a dinner party, a work meeting, a coffee shop you've been to 100 times, and then someone walks in, or looks up, or says something in a particular way and something in the room shifts, quietly, without announcement. Your attention narrows. The ambient noise pulls back slightly. You become aware, in a way you weren't 10 seconds ago, of exactly where in the space this person is standing. It doesn't feel like a decision. You didn't choose to be interested. It feels more like something chose for you, like gravity, simply redirected, and now you're oriented toward this person the way a compass needle orients toward north, without consultation, without deliberation. We have a word for what happens next, if you follow it. We say, I fell, past tense, passive construction. Something that happened to you rather than something you did. A loss of footing, of the careful managed distance you usually maintain between yourself and other people. That word is not accidental. The verb we chose, across centuries and cultures, to describe the experience of romantic love, is a verb of lost control, of being subject to something rather than authoring it. We don't say, I decided to love them. We say, I fell, and embedded in that verb is an entire theory of what love is, where it comes from, what it means when it arrives, whether it can be trusted. Carl Jung had a different word for at least some of what we call that. He called it projection. And the gap between those two words, falling and projecting, is not a minor terminological distinction. It is the difference between spending your romantic life as a passenger and, if you're willing to do the work, becoming something closer to its author. This is not an argument against love or against the reality of what you felt. The feeling was real. I want to say that plainly before we go anywhere else, because nothing I'm about to describe is meant to diminish it. But there is a question worth sitting with and worth staying uncomfortable with while we go through this together. What if the person you fell for wasn't exactly who you fell for, but something in you, finally finding a surface to land on, wearing someone else's face? Let me describe a particular kind of experience. Tell me if it's familiar. You've felt that falling sensation more than once, which, by itself, is just being a person who has lived long enough. But if you look honestly at the people who produced it, not at the surface details, which vary, you notice something underneath the variation that doesn't change. A quality, a dynamic, a specific charge that a certain kind of person generates in you, which you've come to associate with the feeling that something real is happening. Something different from all the connections that don't produce that feeling, which are perfectly fine but somehow don't quite register as significant in the same way. And if you trace that pattern back through your history, not to assign blame, just to see it clearly, the same arc appears. The electric beginning, the deepening. A particular moment, structurally the same each time, though the details differ, when something shifts. And the ending, which carries the same specific flavor of grief across every instance, no matter how different the circumstances. Most people, when they finally let themselves see this clearly, feel one of two things: relief, that there's a shape to it, that it isn't just chaos, or something quieter and harder, the recognition that they are the common denominator. Because here is the suffering that almost never gets named directly. It is one thing to walk into something you couldn't see. There's a clean kind of tragedy to that, the blindsided heartbreak, the thing that came from nowhere. You couldn't have known. No one expects you to have known. But it is a different experience entirely to see it coming, to recognize the type, feel the dynamic settling into place, have a fairly accurate sense of how this probably ends, and walk in anyway. Not from recklessness, not from self-destruction, but because the pull is so specific and so strong that knowing better doesn't seem to do anything to it. The knowledge just sits there, ineffective, while something else makes the decision. That gap between knowing and doing, between seeing the pattern and being unable to stop it, produces a shame that is genuinely difficult to articulate, hard to bring to a therapist, harder to say to a friend, hardest of all to admit to yourself in the specific, unsoftened way that it actually is. I knew, and I went anyway. Again, the solutions people reach for are consistent. A new city sometimes, as if geography is the variable. A deliberate change of type, choosing someone who doesn't carry the familiar quality, on the theory that the quality is the problem. A new list, built carefully from the wreckage of the last relationship, of what healthy looks like, and what to look for in someone capable of it. A genuine commitment, made in good faith, to doing this differently. And then, someone appears with that quality. And the list becomes completely irrelevant, because something made the selection before the list had a chance to consult. And months later, you're in the same place, inside the same familiar grief, asking the same question you've been asking for years. Nothing is wrong with you, but something is running the selection process that is not the you who makes lists, not the you who goes to therapy, not the you who has genuinely tried to learn from what happened before. The question this whole video is actually answering is not, why do I keep choosing the wrong people? It's, what is doing the choosing, and what has it been after this whole time? Before anything else, let me be precise about what projection actually is, because the word gets used constantly in psychological conversation, usually loosely, and what Jung meant by it is more specific and considerably more useful than the version most people have encountered. Projection is not delusion. It is not manufacturing something from nothing. It is seeing something genuine in another person, and then adding to it, layering over their actual qualities a significance, a depth, a meaning that doesn't belong to them. That belongs to you, to something in you that has been looking for a place to land. Here is the mechanism underneath it. The psyche cannot hold indefinitely what it has decided is unacceptable. Whatever you've determined consciously or through the slow accumulation of experience is too dangerous to carry openly, too vulnerable to show, too much for the environments you've moved through. The psyche will find somewhere else to put it. And one of the most reliable destinations it uses is other people. What you cannot acknowledge in yourself, you will eventually perceive, or believe you perceive, in someone else. The qualities that went underground, the dimensions of your experience that never found a welcome, the longings that had nowhere to go, they don't simply dissolve, they migrate. They move outward, into the world, scanning for a face that matches the shape of what they're carrying. Jung mapped this with a clinical precision no one had managed before him. And what he found, sitting with patients across decades of psychoanalytic work, was a pattern consistent enough to be called a law. The moment of falling in love, that specific, involuntary, unmistakable experience of sudden attraction, very often corresponds to the moment the projection finds what it believes is its home. When you encounter someone whose surface qualities closely match the shape of your own projected inner content, the unconscious fires a recognition signal. And that signal is what you experience as electricity, as the sense that this person is different from everyone else, as fate, sometimes, as the feeling that you had no real choice. The qualities you're perceiving may well be real. That's important to say. This is not a story about inventing things that aren't there. The problem is not that you saw something false. The problem is the charge you attach to what you saw, the overwhelming, irresistible quality of it, which was not coming from them. It was coming from the projection meeting, what it believed was its home. Jung had specific names for the inner figures that carry the most powerful projections in romantic life. He called them the Anima and the Animus, the inner feminine in a man, the inner masculine in a woman. These are not tidy concepts, and reducing them to tidy ones would make them useless. But the core of what he meant is this: each of us carries, in the unconscious, a complex inner figure built from a lifetime of experience, longing, inherited human pattern, and everything we were never permitted to be. And that figure which wants, above everything, to be integrated into conscious life takes a shortcut. It attaches itself to real people. It demands that they carry what it cannot get you to carry directly. This is why falling in love so often carries that quality of ancient recognition, of knowing someone before you know them, of something being activated that feels much older than the conversation you're currently having. You are recognizing something, but it isn't them. It is your own inner life, looking back at you through their eyes. And here is the line that everything else in this video depends on. You did not fall in love with them. You fell in love with yourself, or more precisely, with the part of yourself you hadn't yet found the courage to carry. That's not comfortable to hear, I know that, but it is the beginning of something that actually changes things. Every heavily projected relationship moves through the same 3 stages. Most people have lived through all of them, probably more than once, without ever having seen the map. Here it is. The first stage is idealization, what Jung called inflation. In the beginning, the projected person seems extraordinary. Not in an obvious cinematic way, in a way that feels earned, grounded, fully justified by what you're observing. They seem more layered than other people, more genuinely present. Your conversations carry a quality that ordinary conversations don't, an aliveness, a sense that something real is happening between 2 people rather than 2 people performing conversation at each other. And you are not entirely wrong. You are perceiving something real. But you are also adding to it, augmenting what is actually there, with the full weight of your projected inner content, which has been waiting, possibly for years, for somewhere to land. Every quality you see in them gets amplified by that waiting. Every depth gets deeper. Every interesting, ordinary human complexity becomes, in the light of a strong projection, something that seems almost mythic. This is what inflation means in Jungian terms. The person is being expanded beyond their actual dimensions by the projection attaching to them. They are being made larger than they are, not because you're foolish or naive, but because the unconscious is doing something it genuinely believes is necessary. This is why people say, I knew from the first conversation, I've never felt this before. Something in me recognized them instantly, all of which may be an accurate description of the experience, none of which is an accurate account of what was generating it. The second stage is demand. Once the projection has found its home, it needs that home to remain stable. And this produces something that almost never gets named in conventional relationship analysis: an unconscious contract. You didn't sign it. You weren't present when it was drafted, but it has been running in the background of the relationship from the beginning, enforcing invisible terms on the other person. Stay this way. Keep carrying this. Keep being the image I placed on you. And the other person, who never agreed to any of this, who doesn't know they're carrying your inner life, who is simply trying to be a human being with a bad week and an off Tuesday, begins to fail the terms. Not dramatically, just ordinarily. They express an opinion that doesn't match who you thought they were. They're tired and distant in a way the image would never have been. They show a limitation, a inconsistency, a piece of themselves that doesn't fit the picture. And something in you responds with a feeling that is slightly too large for what actually happened. Not always anger, though sometimes that. More often a specific anxiety, the kind that comes from sensing something precious beginning to slip. Or a quiet withdrawal, a pulling back of warmth that you can't quite explain to yourself. Or a hurt that you know, somewhere, is disproportionate to the situation, but that you can't seem to scale down. What's happening is that the projection is being disturbed. The image is flickering. And the part of you that organized its emotional life around the stability of that image is responding the way it would to a genuine threat, because to that part, it is a genuine threat. The other person has no framework for this. They only know that sometimes, when they are simply being themselves, not performing, not withdrawing, just being a person, something changes in you. A temperature drop, a distance that wasn't there before. A disappointment they can't trace back to anything they actually did. This is the stage where most projected relationships begin to corrode. Not from betrayal, not from fundamental incompatibility. From the impossible, invisible pressure of a contract no one ever consciously agreed to. The third stage is collapse. At some point, gradually in some relationships, suddenly in others the projection withdraws. The person who seemed extraordinary becomes ordinary. The relationship that felt like it was made of something different from ordinary relationships starts to feel like a question you no longer know how to answer. And this moment, which lands as devastating, as the loss of something that cannot be replaced, is not a loss. It is the first moment of seeing clearly. What collapses when the projection collapses is not the relationship, and not the other person, and not the love, not entirely. What collapses is the image. The unconscious picture that was superimposed over the actual person from the beginning is detaching. The screen is going dark, and what remains, exactly as they always were, is the real human being you've been in relationship with. The grief of that moment is genuine. It should be treated as genuine. But it is grief over the ending of a story your unconscious was telling about itself, using another person as the vehicle. And here is the thing almost no one notices in the middle of that grief. The exact shape of what you lost is a self-portrait. Everything the projection was carrying, every quality you amplified in that person, every depth you were so certain was there, all of it is a map of your own inner territory. The qualities you projected outward are the ones you have not yet found the permission or the courage to inhabit in yourself. The depths you believed they had are depths you carried underground, reached for through other people, because reaching for them directly felt like too much. Every collapsed projection comes back to you as returned mail. The address was always yours. So what does withdrawing a projection actually look like? Because this is where most psychological content stops, right at the edge of the practical, where the work has to happen. And stopping there produces something frustrating. A person who now understands their pattern with genuine precision and has nothing to do with that understanding except carry it around. Withdrawing a projection is not a decision. You cannot will yourself to stop projecting any more than you can will yourself to stop dreaming. The unconscious doesn't take direction from conscious resolutions. What it does respond to is attention. Close, honest, unglamorous attention to what you're actually doing, which means learning to catch the projection early enough that you can examine it before it's fully taken hold. Here is what that practice looks like. The next time you feel that particular pull towards someone, that involuntary narrowing of attention, the sense that this person is somehow different, don't simply follow it. And don't perform the suppression of it, which is just another way of avoiding what it's carrying. Instead, pause, just long enough to ask a question you have probably never thought to ask in that specific moment. What quality in this person is generating this response in me? Not, do they feel the same way? Not, where could this go? Not, am I ready for this? What quality? The actual characteristic. The specific thing your attention keeps returning to. What is it, precisely, that makes this person feel more vivid than the people around them? Name it, out loud if you can, or in writing, or at minimum, as a specific thought, rather than a feeling you stay inside without examining. And then ask the second question, which is where the real work begins. Where in my own life have I not let myself have access to that? The quality you keep finding irresistible in other people is almost always a quality you were not permitted or did not permit yourself to fully inhabit. It went somewhere. At some point, in some specific set of circumstances, it became too costly or too dangerous or simply too foreign to the version of yourself you were required to be. When you can name the quality and trace it even partially back to where it went in your own history, something shifts in how the projection feels. The overwhelming quality of it begins to change. Not because the person becomes less interesting, but because you have introduced a small amount of space between the feeling and the unconscious mechanism generating it. That space is where choice lives. What this process actually feels like is disorienting, at least at first, because the quality you've been finding in others, when you encounter it in yourself, doesn't arrive looking the way it looked in them. In another person, it had 30 years of shaping their personality, their history with it, the particular form it took as it moved through their life. In you, raw, it has none of that context. It shows up unformed. The emotional openness you found magnetic in someone else might feel, in yourself, like dangerous exposure. The confidence you were drawn to might feel, in yourself, like arrogance you were taught to suppress. The wildness, the directness, the particular quality of presence that made a certain kind of person impossible to ignore those qualities, in your own interior, can feel almost threatening, like something you'd need to be a different person to carry. This is the moment most people quietly retreat. Not dramatically, they just find themselves, a few weeks later, in the familiar pull of someone who carries the quality they briefly touched in themselves and couldn't quite hold. If that happens, It isn't failure. It's actually useful information. It tells you how much charge is still on that particular piece, how much it cost the first time, how well defended the hiding place still is. But if you can stay with it, if you can remain in contact with that disowned quality in yourself for a little longer than is comfortable, something in the pattern softens. The pull toward a certain kind of person loses some of its voltage, not because you've closed yourself off, because you are beginning, imperfectly, to carry some of what you'd been outsourcing. And what you can carry yourself, you no longer need to find in someone else. Let me describe what love looks like when the heavy projection is no longer running it. It does not look like what the movies promised. It doesn't arrive with that specific electricity. It doesn't produce the sense of recognition of something inevitable clicking into place, of fate arranging itself visibly in front of you. It tends to begin quietly. And for people who have spent years calibrated to the intense signal of projection, that quiet can feel, at first, like absence, like something is missing, like the thing you're choosing is smaller than the thing you've been reaching for. That feeling is the old signal calibrated to projection misreading a different frequency as silence. Because what the quiet actually contains is something the electricity never did. The other person. When you are not loading someone with the weight of your own projected inner life, you can see them. Not the image, not the screen. The actual, specific, unrepeatable human being standing in front of you with their own interior that has nothing to do with yours, their own history you didn't share, their own strangeness that is genuinely theirs. Real people, seen clearly, are strange. Not in a disappointing way, in a way that is, if you've never experienced it without a projection, running surprisingly interesting. They have depths that are not reflections of yours. They have ways of seeing the world that you couldn't have predicted and couldn't have generated from your own inner life. That's rare, rarer than it sounds. Because most people inside a strong projection are not actually curious about their partner. They are monitoring them. And the difference between those two things is everything. Monitoring is watching to see whether the person is still being what you need them to be, with the low-level anxiety of someone whose peace depends on the answer staying yes. It looks like paying attention, but its orientation is inward, toward your own stability, your own image, your own unconscious need. Curiosity is interest in what the other person actually is, with no particular stake in what you find. Its orientation is outward, toward them, toward their actual interior, their actual experience of being alive. Most projected relationships are, at bottom, a form of monitoring dressed as connection. Relationships built on curiosity have a different texture from the inside. They're less volatile not because they lack feeling, but because their ground was never an illusion that needs protecting. They can hold the other person having a difficult season, changing their mind about something important, failing in ordinary ways because none of that threatens the foundation, which was built on something real. They also deepen differently. The projection model delivers maximum intensity at the start, when the image is newest. The match feels most complete, and the unconscious is most fully invested, and then a long, slow diminishment as the image can no longer be maintained. The curiosity model works in the opposite direction. The more you know someone, the more of their actual interior you've encountered, the more genuinely interesting they tend to become. Jung returned to one particular idea across his entire body of work, in different forms and different vocabularies, because he kept finding it confirmed. When you stop using another person to carry your inner life, you become capable of genuinely loving them, not more capable of the feeling of love, more capable of what love actually requires, which is presence, sustained, ungrasping, undefended attention to the life of someone who is not you, someone who is separate from you in ways that are real and permanent, and not a problem to be solved. That kind of presence is not available when you're projecting, because projection is fundamentally self-referential. You are not encountering the other person. You are encountering yourself, in them, and calling it connection. The love that becomes possible when the projection softens is harder to describe in romantic terms. It has less narrative tension. It wouldn't necessarily make a compelling early montage, but it is, in the only sense that holds up over time, Love that is actually about the other person. That is not a lesser thing. It is the only thing that lasts. Before we finish, I want to offer you a different way of reading your own history. Think about the people you've fallen for. Not just the ones who lasted, the ones who produced that specific feeling, the involuntary narrowing of attention, the sense of encountering something real, the quality of being more awake in their presence than you were everywhere else. Most people look at that list and see the record of a romantic life, some good choices, some bad ones, some things that worked for a while and some that didn't, the usual tally of luck and timing, and the unpredictability of other people. But that's not what Jung would see. He would see a document, a precise, surprisingly consistent, deeply personal document assembled by your own unconscious, over years and across different people and circumstances, always returning to the same territory, always pointing at the same quality, always trying to surface the same unfinished material, in one new face after another, because it had no other way to reach you. Every person on that list was carrying something for you, not deliberately, not with any awareness of the role they'd been assigned, but carrying it, holding a piece of your inner life that you hadn't yet found a way to hold yourself, while the unconscious kept finding new vehicles for it, new circumstances to put it in front of you, hoping you'd eventually look past the face to what was actually being offered. The falling was not random. The endings were not a record of failure. Every collapsed projection is a returned letter, contents intact, address correct, the same message it has always contained. This belongs to you. It always did. Come get it. So here is the question I want to leave you with. The one the whole video has been working toward. The kind worth writing somewhere, worth returning to when the answer that comes first is too easy. Think of the person you fell for most completely, the one who felt like recognition, like something you discovered rather than chose, and ask yourself honestly, what quality in them have you spent your life telling yourself you don't have? Take your time with that. The real answer usually isn't the first one. Because the answer to that question is not about them. It is a description of a part of you that went somewhere early, that has been trying to come back through other people's faces, that has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to stop looking outward and recognize it as your own. Jung called it projection. You called it falling in love. The difference, the real difference, is that one of those keeps you a passenger in your own romantic life. The other makes you the author of it. And you have been a passenger long enough.